Sure. I can go with the first one. So, uh, there was one PR related to one of the issues that was discussed with you, John, earlier. I think a couple of months back. I think I see the same. In the last week, the custom priority endpoints also covers the same requirement we had raised. So in a way, it is related to that. Uh, John, you maybe if you take a look at the issue, right? You may recall our discussion. I think you have given the same suggestion in the custom priority endpoints also. Just need your intervention to reopen and uh, review the PR. And yeah, with your inputs, I can get it. Yeah, forward.
Yeah, so two things. One, I tried to open the PR. It wouldn't let me. It said that it had been force pushed after it was deleted or something. I don't know. Some error I've never seen in GitHub before. So either, I don't know. I guess you probably need a new PR. But once you do, please, assign us. I mean, we'll get auto assigned probably, and we can take a look. Sorry, I think this one fell through the cracks. So.
Okay, sure. I'll create a new PR. That should be fine. Sure. Yeah, that is all I guess from on that one. Thanks.
Cool. So next one, Fasila, I think she said she won't be here and wanted offline review of this. So please review it. If we have some more time at the end, maybe we can go over it. But for now, it's she's decided just offline, so I think it's fine. It's very similar to the OCSP one, actually. So I took a brief look at it. The next one is just set here. I don't think he's here, so maybe we'll skip mine. And that brings us to skip trust domain. I don't know who put this on.
Yeah, maybe Zonghu put it on, but I can speak about it if needed. I don't think he's here. Is he here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so basically the background information is he has a PR, tries to remove this function, right? So before he removed that, we would like to understand what's the proper way to do things, right? Because we don't remove things and not bring clarity of what's the right way to do things. I believe we have users using this function, so we do want to make sure what's the proper API. So I try to comment in the GitHub on my thoughts, which I think it's using the certificate data to specify the other trust domains intermediate certs, and so that or root cert, so that it can do the proper validation.
Yeah, so I guess there's a few points. One, you said we don't remove things. I'm not sure that's entirely true for these feature flags. Like, these are intended to be transient. So I think that part's fine. It's also fine to say, hey, we use this. Please let us have some time to off-ramp something before we pull the rug out, which is fine. So I think everything here is fine from a procedural standpoint. I guess the next question is, what should you use instead?
Right, that's the key thing, mainly, yes.
So you use this today, and you don't validate trust domain because you have different clusters or something with different trust domains, but the same shared root, and you don't care what trust domain they're from. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so basically, I think a while back, when we tried with trust domain enabled, we had issues, and we've been just enabled the skip trust domain validation.
And using your trust domain aliases doesn't work for you? I mean, putting all the aliases in that single.
You mean the alias stuff?
Yeah, if you have different trust domain in each cluster, you can just put them all in aliases.
Yeah, so we haven't tried the alias, but I'm not sure if alias is the right way because my understanding is the alias is designed for migration of trust domain. Right. So I guess I want to have the discussion of what is the proper way if I do have two trust domain and I do want to do validation.
So
My understanding is alias is only for as you migrate your trust domain for temporary thing, right? You use alias.
I don't know what was the original intent of when it was implemented or what was the original use case, but all APIs, exist as APIs. I mean, it's supposed to be respected regardless of the original intent of of the feature. I mean, auto MTLS was also probably designed for migration. A lot of features were designed for something and are used for something else. We have an API that allows you to customize a set of aliases or trust domain. It's documented. It doesn't say anywhere that, hey, it must only be used for the original intended use case and nothing else. So I want to, treat APIs as, just like the letter, not the intent of the author.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. I guess I'm just worried about if we use alias, we wouldn't be able to differentiate the identity between the two trust domain. Remember we had this discussion, I think it was maybe 2-3 months ago, right? So we actually did some experimental. There was this guy in the community, I think his name was Sudi. He was interested in the spell integration. And I think Liming, if you're on the call, I recall you were part of the conversation too. So if using alias, if I remember correctly, if we use trust domain alias, you wouldn't be able to differentiate the identity from one trust domain to the other trust domain. If you don't use alias, you could potentially differentiate the identity.
So if you have pilot skip validate trust domain, the identity is reserved, and if you have aliases, it's not reserved.
No. Skip validation is not reserved either. I was just wondering if certificate data would reserve the identity.
So I cannot imagine any reason, or as a feature, not. I mean, it may be a bug somewhere in the code. I haven't looked, but as far as I know, all the information about the certificate is propagated and is available in checks. And so you are talking about authorizing a client or authorizing a server? Policies are applied on server. So
it would be server, yeah.
So a server verifying the identity of the client, it should have access to the entire. I mean, it's one of the features. We can put the fully qualified PV identity in the rule. And I would find it very difficult to believe that we are replacing trust. I mean, we are doing any kind of manipulations there or overriding it.
Even using alias?
Aliases just means that when you validate, all of them are treated as equivalent. Doesn't mean that you are replacing or you are losing the information. So the X forwarded client certificate is supposed to have the original, SPIF URL that was in the peer certificate, not some random stuff. So it's an it's a list. So when you validate the certificate, you take any element in the list, and if it matches, it's good. But you still preserve the original information. We can have explicit rules to verify the whatever match you want.
Okay, so if alias also works, I mean, why would people using certificate data? Because it seems it's a lot harder to configure with certificate data, right? And plus, you have to, in mesh config, if you check the comment I had 2 days ago, in mesh config, there is this configuration called certificate data where you can specify the PAM data of the certificate. And I assume you would have to update this when the certificate gets rotated.
No, that's different. That's if you want. So trust domain alias means they have the same root, but you don't care what trust domain they're in. That thing that you're looking at is saying that each trust domain can have a different root.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the certificate data is a root, so you rotate if the root changes, but that's pretty infrequent, right?
to be precise here, both roots and trust domains can be multiples and can have aliases. So you can have multiple root CAs and you can have multiple trust domains. There are different stages. I mean, it is possible even today to have multiple root CAs.
Okay, so certificate data is applicable when you have your own root and you want to be do trust validation across multiple roots, right?
Yeah, or you have additional roots. So you may have in clusters a normal Citadel trust domain, but you may want to add additional certificates from different clusters because you have multiple roots.
Okay, so it sounds like if we are using the same root and just having intermediate certs across more than one cluster, trust domain alias would be the right way, and it seems simpler to config too, right?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's safer because again, you have a bit additional restrictions. If you have a use case to allow all certificates, I would implement it by adding a star or something in the aliases. Or some other explicit configuration in mesh config. Because my concern with all the environment variables is that it's kind of the lowest end of the API stability, and because you need to restart Istio, you need to put, especially if it's applying globally to Istio D, it's not really something that it's.
Yeah. To provide a little context there, I did check our feature lifecycle. I don't remember whether environment variables were considered experimental or alpha. I'm sure they're not eligible for beta. And for both of those, our deprecation policy is that we do not need to give any warning to users. They can simply be removed. That doesn't make that the right decision to do here, but we are within our own support policy to do so.
Yeah. And to be clear, my concern here about why I think generally I don't like removing anything, because even if it's helpful for some people, but in this particular case, the specifications, PIP specification generally say you need to verify trust domain. It's kind of just like with ignore certificates or the other things. I mean, it contradicts standards. Yeah.
Okay, this has been very helpful. Daniel, do you have any questions? I saw you mentioned something in the chat.
No, I just wanted to kind of put a reference of why the skip validate trust domain was being used as you can see in the proxy code line 65, doing the comparison between the peer trust domain and the local trust domain. Now, I'm surprised, are they using certificate data or the aliases? I thought that we'd actually see maybe like a list of peer trust domains that dysfunction kind of iterates through to do that comparison. But I still need to dig into the code more to better understand this.
Yeah, please do so. And if you find, I mean, it would be a bug if it's not propagated. And if you find anything wrong, we need to fix. Mitch, what is the policy about when we remove flags? Do we need to give an advanced, announce it in one release and we just silently drop it? Maybe if we change the policy to, kind of.
So I'll link to the policy just so that everyone has the same access to it. I'll drop that in the chat here. But as far as I'm reading it, the only things that we actually have committed to advance notice for users before we remove are beta features, which can be removed within 3 months of advance notice. Again, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to remove things without notice. There may be times where, hey, we called this alpha, but we know that users far and wide are relying on it, so we should give lots of notice. But we're within policy.
Yeah, let's try to be nice. I mean, in this case, why not? I mean, let's put a release note that next release will remove this, and maybe that may become at some point the policy. It's never bad to.
Yeah. So we should probably also ask for an analyzer that gives a deprecation warning there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Greg, do you have a hand?
Yeah, just definitely seconding the release note item for that, because it's happened before. I know Solo hit this with one not too recently. Yeah, just making sure that there's a deprecation notice when these environment variables are deleted so that it comes up on the change logs.
So I will say, like, if this is a consistent thing that you feel that we need to do on a regular basis when any environment variable is deprecated, we should consider either changing our policy so that alpha features require deprecation notices, or promoting our environment variables to beta. Either of those have trade-offs that could have consequences. But what I would like to get in the state of is where our policy matches what we generally ought to do. So that we don't have to have, long dialogues about whether or not we're going to do that. If our users really need deprecation notices on all of these things, let's update our processes to match that.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, the second one is not an option. I mean, to put the environment values. I mean,
I agree.
mesh config is not beta either.
I agree.
There's no plan to make it beta either. But in mesh config, removing anything would be definitely something that needs notice.
Even if we all wanted to move it to beta, the process of getting all of those checklists done, as well as getting it through all of the TOC approvals, even coming from a TOC member, I think that would be extremely difficult to do.
Yeah. So TOC, please change policy.
Okay. Greg, I'll work with you on an update to the policy as far as what you think might be reasonable.
All right, sounds good.
John, did you have the hand?
Yeah, what's the forward path for this specific PR? Do you guys need to go try out to make sure the alternatives work and then we remove it, or what?
Yeah, we are interested to try it out and report back, right? Because honestly, if we have this problem, I think some of the users in the community might have the same problem. So as we remove this flag, I think it would be nice to provide some clarity as to, what's the recommendation for this? How do you do trust domain validation in the right way so you don't have to rely on this flag? Does that sound reasonable? Okay.
I think for next step is if TOC decides to have an advanced notice, this PR needs to be split into one, changing release note only, and the one that will be committed in 1.19, 20, or whatever.
Yeah, in my opinion, the advanced notice is now for every environment variable. Consider them notified. They may be removed now or in 2 years, but they're going to be removed. Sorry, that was somewhat sarcastic, but
yeah, a notice would be nice though. I mean, at the minimum, I would like to be noticed at the work group meeting notes level, right? So people can at least see them, because not everybody babysit every single PR. So at least, if people look at the notes of this meeting, they will be able to figure out.
Now, to kind of build on what John said earlier, sarcastically probably, but we are launching ambient, and that's going to remove, deprecate, make obsolete a shitload of environment variable settings, APIs, and so forth. So probably we should have some way to communicate what will work, what will not work. And
so as I understand, those environment variables will keep working for sidecar mode. They just won't work for ambient mode, right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, Keith?
Yeah, just a quick question. Apologies if this was mentioned, but I don't think I caught it. Is there an existing process for evaluating environment variables in use and either pushing to promote them or sunsetting them because they're not useful anymore? Sounds like that might be a useful thing based on this conversation.
That would be a very useful thing. There's a long history to that idea. It's a great idea. There's twofold to it. One, we've never been able to collect any utilization information on how Istio is used in any way, whether we're talking about CRDs or environment variables, beyond what Google has been willing to contribute based on their internal queries. any sort of, phone home and report telemetry or report utilization back to the Istio project. There are a few open source projects that do that, but not many. And there's a little bit of feeling of discomfort on the part of our users with being reported on, so to speak, and what data would be reported. We have agreed on multiple occasions to develop a command that allows users to at least see what their own exposure to alpha level APIs are, because those represent additional risk for them. However, while we've agreed that it ought to be done, we've never been able to staff that effort.
And don't forget, Istio is volunteer based. If someone really wants it, needs to send PRs, hard test. The process of promotion to beta is a long one, but so many things remain in alpha because there is no interest from developers, right? Even if users may want them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got some Istio users on Azure. I can look into what the process might be of just seeing what telemetry we have and seeing if that might be useful to the community. Because I agree that like having a sense of what's being used is pretty necessary for moving forward with any kind of deprecation. So I'll look internally and see what we can do to help.
That would be awesome. And Keith, I'd be happy to walk you through some of the reports that Google produces on a regular basis about Istio utilization. Most of the regular ones are focused on upgrade behavior, but it would be great to have something similar to apples from Azure as well. Obviously, Google is only one slice of the cloud market, so gaining that global perspective is very valuable.
Yeah, happy to. Let's sync offline about that.
Cool.
Mitch, are environment variables something, the environment variables that control feature flags, is that something that we could potentially add to upgrade surveys?
What would the question be? Like, which environment variables are you using?
Yeah.
I expect that many of our users will not necessarily be aware. We would need to provide almost like a script, like run this YAML linter over your Helm values file, and it'll pull out all the mvars and you can share it with us or something like that. So that's possible. Or, like John mentioned, a command in Istio control. There's a number of viable options. It's really a question of staffing. I've started down this road 3 or 4 times and not been able to finish.
By the way, since we're beating environment variables to death here, one thing that was discussed at some point, I don't know if again staffing and anyone is volunteering to do it, to just in proxy config we have environment variable meta, or I don't know how it's called, where we set all the environment variables for the sidecar. It may make sense to add to mesh config, which is also alpha field, which is environment variables, which will and modifies the code that is dealing with environment variables in pilot. So at least we have mesh config only to deal with, and we can deal with some reloading and some other. So we don't have environment variables, mesh config, different reloading and other semantics. And flags as well, because we still have a few flags in pilot that are so 3 ways to configure.
That may be reasonable. It's worth noting for those that have joined the community in the last few years that this topic sits at the intersection of multiple issues that we've found it very difficult to build consensus on and move forward. Feature maturity and life cycle has been difficult to move forward. We initially had wanted all alpha features to either be promoted to beta or deprecated. That really didn't work in terms of follow through. Mesh config also has its own history of we want some parts of it to become a more realistic API. We want other parts of it to go away. And so these are all challenging and tangled issues, but it's worth taking another shot at them if we can move them forward.
Or at least just start by getting rid of CLI flags, because you're difficult. We have CLI flags, environment variables, mesh config, and APIs. Too much.
Yeah, well, and in particular, within the last few weeks, we've given guidance in a few PRs that we would much rather see environment variables be used than CLI flags. So we almost need like a hierarchy of horribleness where flags are, I think, the worst. Environment variables are next, and then maybe config maps and CRDs.
And CRDs, again, they may come back. I mean, in Kubernetes, apparently having experimental CRDs is not considered such a catastrophic thing.
Yeah.
I feel the need to just add one small thing in here too, that as someone kind of new to the community, I've been trying to kind of map out the feature maturity and feature detection story of, okay, what features is a user using, and with Kubernetes, all alpha features are like behind a gate, and there's not any kind of thing like that in Istio. I've gotten some feedback from folks that that might be useful to them, so that they can have some confidence in what they're using. But also, I think that would act as sort of a forcing function to promote things to beta or stable, so that they're not behind that gate. Of course, there's always that usability question of, oh, if it's off by default, then how do we get usage and feedback? But I think it would be useful. I'm happy to chat with other people. Cost dimensions was proposed before, and volunteers are needed. I'm happy to figure out what's necessary and perhaps even staff some of that effort.
One thing I would suggest, because I think that's a great idea, it may be a bit too late for the Istio APIs that we have, but for ambient at least, it will be super awesome to have this flag in both vTunnel and Istio Distro, to have a way to run ambient basically in safe mode.
Yeah.
Or in an experimental mode. John, what do you think?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it could be. I mean, I guess there's a difference between denying the variables versus, like, we had the idea of like, oh, we'll have a preview profile or whatever where we turn on all the experimental stuff. But I think what you're suggesting is the opposite, where we have like a strict profile where you can't set that stuff, which is a bit different. It is a bit interesting because, I don't know, I guess it's a one more explicit nod that you have to flip before you can use the other ones, I suppose. But it's not as enforced as in other places. Like on GK, for example, if you want to use an alpha feature, you have to actually go create a dedicated cluster for alpha, and I think it dies after 30 days or something. With Istio, we don't actually have it. They just flip the flag, and then they're like, okay, cool, back to the old world. So it could be useful. I don't know.
I like these. Oh, go ahead, Keith.
Oh, go ahead. You haven't spoken on this yet.
I love the idea about a flag that turns off all alpha features or makes them unsettable, or maybe warns you if you're setting alpha features in your Helm values chart. For ambient in particular, as I understand it, the whole feature is going to be alpha when we launch it. So in order to use ambient, all of our users would have to set that flag. And then if they're in the habit of it, by the time ambient becomes stable, my thought is that they probably just leave that flag on, which might limit some of its value.
That's a really good point. Yeah, timing becomes very interesting with this. Yeah, I'll do some more thought on what that would look like. If anybody else has ideas here, would love to chat. Especially since it sounds like it's not a very new idea as far as more explicit feature gates. Would love to understand prior art. But yeah, looking forward. If I put together a doc or anything like that, I'll share it here. We can discuss. Sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the topic.
No, it's very good hijacking. Please keep doing it.
Any
All
other
right, should we go on to tags?
Thanks, John. So brought this up in the ambient meeting last week, and the recommendation was, because it impacts sidecar mode as well, that we could discuss it here. Ambient has a need for a way to set tags that is different from the way that we set tags today. Today, we set tags by creating mutating webhook configs using an Istio control command. That's great because in sidecar mode, a tag needs to be a mutating webhook config. That's how we operate a tag. In ambient mode, there will be no need for mutating webhook configs. And mutating webhook configs are also much more complex than the API that we would ideally expose for tags. So at the same time, what we want to not do, I think, is have a completely different way of interacting for tags in ambient versus sidecar mode. We'd like users to be able to use both of these modes side by side for some period of time as they migrate onto the new platform. And frankly, even if it weren't side by side, just the more consistency we can have between sidecar mode and ambient mode, the more familiar it's going to be to our existing users and the easier the onboarding process will be for them. So to that end, I am proposing the creation of a tag CRD. It's very simple. It just takes the parameters that you would currently specify in the istio tag create command. That is a tag name, the revision it points to, and a Boolean value indicating whether it does auto namespace injection. I'm proposing that we use this in sidecar mode as well so that we have a consistent API between sidecar mode and ambient. And so I wanted to bring the proposal up here, answer any questions I can about how this API would work. I do think there are a couple of advantages for sidecar mode having this API, even if we were not to go the ambient route. However, because of ambient, I think it's even more important that we consider this. Are there questions? I'd like to stop for questions, or I can just start talking about advantages for sidecar mode if there aren't any particular questions here.
Yeah, same comment I had previously in ambient. I mean, not a CRD, but having it somewhere else, it's okay with me.
Yeah, I haven't seen an alternative proposal yet, but I'd be open to alternatives to a CRD. I don't know what they are. Yeah, Keith.
Yeah, my question here, and apologies, I haven't had a chance to look at the proposal super thoroughly, but for sidecar mode specifically with the tag CRD, like replace the mutating webhook configuration? Would it be operator for the mutating webhook configuration? How would that work?
It would effectively be the controlling resource of the mutating webhook configuration. So sidecar mode will continue to need a mutating webhook to function. That's how we do sidecar injection. When a pod is created, the webhook grabs it and sends it to Istio. So that'll need to continue in sidecar mode. The tag API would just take an API that currently only exists in CLI form and formalize it within the Istio CRD space.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's what I would assume for this kind of design. I'm generally in favor. Tags was, I think you brought up GetOps in the ambient meeting last time, and that was my exact use case about a year and a half ago. And I couldn't use tags because we were doing everything in Terraform and things like that. And using the Istio CTL CLI was just not something we could do at the time. So would a CRD, does it seem too bad for me? I like the idea of a higher level resource, so where the customer, like the user, doesn't have to get too bogged down with the complexity of mutating webhook configurations. But that's my initial thoughts. I'll read through the documentation, through the proposal more closely and leave comments.
Sounds good. Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, so again, keep in mind, we have, sorry, Julian, just want to say, how would it look for gateway and Gamma? Because we have similar problems from the discussions about having supporting multiple meshes in a cluster support. It's kind of the same thing, supporting multiple meshes versus supporting different tags, because it's effectively different version of the thing.
So gateways today, if we're using the Kubernetes Gateway API to do ingress or egress gateways in sidecar mode, already support the revision label. which indicates what particular revision they're participating, either using a tag or directly linking to a revision. So that would just be the same thing would happen for our Gamma waypoint gateways. They would support the same label consistently with our existing gateways.
Sorry, Lynn, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I guess I'm trying to think in loud myself. So the benefit, so first of all, I do believe we will continue support whatever we support for sidecar today, right? If with your proposal, right? So people can still continue to use labels to indicate their revision, right? This is on top of what's being supported today. You are proposing having a dedicated tag CR customer resource where people can apply that either mesh wide or namespace wide or maybe workload per particular workload, right?
So tags already exist as a mesh wide concept, and this would not change that. There would be no particular workload or particular namespace changes. What would change is that when a user today that interacts with tags by running istio tag create, that command, instead of directly creating a mutating webhook config, could create a tag CRD. That tag CRD then would be picked up by IstioD, and incidentally, a mutating webhook config would be created. So they're able to use the exact same interface they use today, the exact same labeling paradigm. The only difference is that under the hood, there's a CRD that gets created in the process. And if they want, they can interact with that CRD directly rather than needing to use Istio control commands.
Okay, so maybe I'm missing something. So is what you're proposing a customer resource, developer service owner feature, or is it more operator feature?
I don't know what a developer service owner feature is.
Let's say, okay, let's say I'm the owner for Bookinfo, and now I want to tag Bookinfo to use maybe the canary version of the control plane. Now, do I create a tag resource? Because today I know how to do that, right? I label my Bookinfo deployments and point to the revision I want to point to, whether it's Canary or Istio 118. I'm trying to think what you are proposing. Do I create a tag customer resource and then select Bookinfo as my workload?
You do precisely the same thing you do today. So
okay.
Yeah, so if your workflow today is like, I have a stable tag and a beta tag for the different versions of Istio that I run in the cluster, and my workloads are divided. Some of them want beta for the newest features, others want stable for stability. You could do exactly that same thing today. Your workloads stay labeled and namespaces stay labeled exactly the same way. If you want to, you can interact with the tag CRD rather than the Istio create tag command, but you don't have to. You can continue using precisely the same workflow and it'll work exactly the same way that it does today.
Okay, and let's say if I do want to interact with the Istio tag CRD, do I just create a tag resource to specify, instead of using the label, do I specify a new tag resource to say, hey, for these workloads, I want to be configured with Istio 1.18 control plane? Is that?
No, so a tag does not specify what workloads are part of it. A tag only specifies effectively an alias for a revision. Workloads specify what tags they want to be a part of using either workload labels or namespace labels. Does that make sense?
Okay, I got it now. Yeah. That's back to my question of who is using this resource, right? So it sounds like it's not going to be a service owner who owns Bookinfo, right? Because okay, so that's more admin and mesh operator. Okay, yeah.
Yes, today, in order to run the Istio create tag command, a user must have effectively admin privileges to the cluster. And so we would recommend that paradigm carry over to the tag CRD. The users who can modify tags have admin permissions to the cluster. Costin, I see you've raised a comment in the thread around security. Do you want to speak to that, or do you just want me to respond to what you've written?
You can respond to what I've written, yes.
Okay, so the one concern with this plan is it does involve IstioD modifying mutating webhook configs. And modifying a mutating webhook config is effectively a cluster admin privilege. It's like having root on the cluster. Today, users who run the create tag command have to have cluster admin privileges. But incidentally, Istio already asks for permission to create and modify mutating webhook configs today. So this change could be made without changing any of Istio permissions in the cluster.
Yeah, but the fact that Istio has it, it's more, kind of a bug, not a feature, and it's, kind of violating a lot of security principles. And some implementations, for example, the only reason we have it is because we need to patch. We don't have a Acme signed certificate or a public certificate, so we need to patch the mutating webhook. We don't create. But if someone has an Istio running, managed or having proper certificates, then it doesn't need Istio doesn't need to run with this permission. So that will be a regression, at least for some implementations where Istio could be, deprivileged.
Yeah, so for those models, I have the security implications paragraph, which is the last paragraph before the appendix. Basically today, if you don't want to have Istio have mutating webhook permissions, there are special settings you can set in your Helm values chart. I actually don't know what they are, so I'd love some pointers on that. That will remove that permission from Istio, and then you take responsibility for doing some extra steps when you create a tag. The same could be true of this model with CRDs. Basically, when you turn on what I'll call high security mode, where Istio doesn't have the mutating webhook config permissions, we will reject any changes that you make unilaterally to tag CRDs. And there will be a process that you'll need to follow, very similar to today's process, where you have to specify extra information when you create a tag. And then the CRDs can be updated to reflect that by Istio.
Yeah, my only concern is if you run normal Istio, then you get the tag and it works fine. But then if you run a secure Istio, the tag CRD suddenly doesn't actually really work. So you kind of get an inconsistent experience. And yes, it would be nice if the same CRDs worked across different usages of Istio.
So to be clear, though, that's already the case, right? If you're running Istio without mutating webhook configuration permissions, the process for creating a tag is different than if you're running it with those permissions. There are extra steps you need to take.
I mean, today you always use the same command, and that person has to be an admin, but they just always use the same Istio tag create.
With the exception that you need to be able to specify the CA bundle, right?
No. When you have this non-root mode, well, first of all, two things. One is that when users run in this mode, they almost overwhelmingly don't specify CA bundle because they use a publicly trusted certificate anyways. You only need the CA bundle if you have a custom root cert that the API server doesn't trust. So like, for example, I'll use Google MCP because you're familiar with it. Like we have a google.com certificate or whatever, which the API server already trusts. So we don't need to specify that at all. But I also think that the revision tag command will copy the existing CA bundle into the new one from the revision. So even if you aren't in that case, but somehow are doing it kind of manually, you would be fine there, I think.
So the tag command sort of automatically handles that for you.
Yeah, it copies it over. Yeah.
So if there is a way to have a consistent API between ambient and sidecar mode, to have it compatible with GitOps, and to have a better security stance than what I've proposed here, I would be very interested in that alternative. I don't see one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
But where does this requirement come from? I mean, I understand having a better solution for ambient, and for ambient will not have injection, so that's not a problem in the first place. But there are plenty of other APIs that will not be consistent, a lot of APIs that only operate in sidecar mode. Ambient can be better without making risky changes or actually spending more time on because it's already pretty complicated and people seem to be okay with what we have with sidecars. And if they are not, they should move to ambient, no?
So if we're not looking for consistency between ambient and sidecar mode, what I would recommend is that we not use tags and revisions at all in ambient. And the reason being, we don't want to have two concepts of tags present in the cluster simultaneously, where you have sidecar mode tags and then you also have ambient tags, and it's unclear which is which. So my initial proposal was to move away from tags and revisions for ambient mode, and it was pretty unanimously shot down in the ambient meeting in favor of using tags and revisions.
I don't know if I was in the meeting shutting it down, but I can change my mind if I did.
Okay.
The tunnel by definition cannot support tags because you cannot have, you cannot customize the same level of granularity tags and revisions like you do today. I mean,
Okay.
The waypoints, though, that's where it
the
matters.
waypoints are different, but I mean, it's already not consistent because the tunnel will not be able to support it by definition.
Maybe.
And for waypoint is managed by Istio, it's no longer injection based. It's we can define a different policy that we control a bit, kind of. So I would rather keep power of choosing what Istio need to use in the implementation instead of giving it to the ambient.
Any other thoughts on compatibility between the two modes and the trade-offs there?
I'm not idealistically opposed to a different mechanism, but I don't intuitively come up with one on my own on how that would work, and I haven't seen any suggestions. So it's hard to.
Proposal. I mean, it's ambient specific, so technically it's not this meeting, it's the other. But yeah. I can point that out to you in the notes.
Okay, like I would say I share the general concern with cost. And like my mind is like this, I think makes sense in ambient context. I think to me this is a good idea. I'm slightly negative on the sidecars for the security risk and what everything we've discussed. If it was me, I realize this is like a unfortunate messaging to you that like, well, we don't have a better alternative, but not this. Like if it was me, I would probably wait a bit more until ambient was more prevalent, and then maybe we can just solve ambient and kind of not support the sidecars. But right now, it's a bit too early to do that. I'm not saying that you need to do that. That's just what I would probably personally do if I was a one-man Istio show.
I just linked something in the notes that is completely irrelevant. My apologies. I did not realize what I had on my clipboard. Okay, I will highlight for you the previous proposal, which is a CRD that is unique to ambient that controls which waypoint is selected by which effectively revision. I think any of the options we have will have drawbacks. And what might be in order is to sort of bring up a table that shows each of the possibilities and the pros and cons, because we do need a solution on this, and we need it relatively soon. I think we're trying to get ambient to alpha readiness in the 118 timeframe, which means I need to start coding on whatever solution we come up with for tags and revisions, etc., in the next week or two.
In 119, actually, Mitch, I put it in the comments. In 118, there is no need to have a tag because there is nothing to migrate from. So operationally, the first upgrade and the first switch from 118 will be to 119.
I will say there's no need to. In the short term, everything works fine. The only time it becomes an issue is if you want to run without a mutating webhook in the cluster whatsoever.
Right.
And today, like we don't even have a like we don't have a mode where ambient doesn't run with sidecars. There's only sidecars and waypoints can run together, and you may choose not to inject any pods, but it's still, all the code's there. So this only actually breaks if we start having like a completely new ambient only, no legacy enabled mode, which I think we probably do want to do. But just to be clear, it doesn't break immediately on alpha. It breaks once we add an option to not have sidecars.
My concern is if we are going to change the API for sidecar selection or waypoint selection of control planes, we need to change that as ambient launches. I think once ambient launches and is out the door, as soon as there's an API that you use to say which waypoint is a part of which control plane, we are effectively going to be using that API for the rest of time.
That's probably true, but I will say that on the ambient alpha launch, I have planned a very long warning paragraph that's going to take up the whole screen of all red background about how you should not depend on APIs, and you need to understand that alpha really means alpha and it's not our usual alpha. So I agree that will be the case, but I don't think it's the case on alpha.
Okay.
So I do think we will make breaking API changes between alpha and some future release. So.
will definitely make sense because we are switching to Gamma Gateway, and as APIs are adopted upstream by Kubernetes, we'll start deprecating and remove them from stop supporting them in Istio, the proprietary ones. Kit.
Yeah, I'm probably in the minority here, but I think there's a difference, however so slight, between ambient only features versus ambient only operations. And this feels like it falls into that category. Like I don't have a problem with kind of the current direction where, for example, consumer side routing is not a thing in ambient, at least not right now. That makes sense to me. I think that having things within ambient that are ambient only for operating your mesh makes things difficult, because then if you're in a mixed context and now you can use tags for one but not for the other, I think that there is a non-zero mid-toll price to pay there for the user of having to keep that separate. Personally, having been a user, I personally didn't see, wasn't super aware of the fact that Istio wasn't wasn't admin already. I kind of saw it as such and protected the Istio system namespace as such. I am just one person though. There are likely other folks in the community, other users that people here can point to where that every little bit of permission is an issue. I again would love to see the tag API be available for sidecar, just given my own experience, but I recognize that there are other things to keep in mind.
You mean for classic or for ambient?
Either, honestly. Just I get the need to solve the problem. Would like there be a better solution for sidecars that was GitOps compatible, but I understand the direction of the Istio project and that these kind of decisions have trade-offs. So I think a chart table of listing those trade-offs and discussing it with that visual in mind is going to be really useful.
Well, and realistically, like sidecar mode requires a mutating webhook config to operate. Unless you're doing manual injection, which very few of our users have taken advantage of, you've got to have one somewhere. So something has to have the privilege to create that config. The question is it safer for that something to be a user typing an Istio cuddle command that they don't know what it's going to do? Or is it safer for that permission to reside with an operator that operates on a particular CRD? I'm not sure that the user model is actually more secure in that case. Certainly for the Google model, as I recall, Google automatically installs the mutating webhook config on behalf of the user, given some options that they select in the UI. So there's already some process somewhere that has those permissions. That process could be what operates tags in Google's case. Anyhow, we're at time, and I don't want to. John, you have something. You have your hand raised, though.
Sorry. Yeah, we had 2 minutes before. Now we're mostly out of time, but I guess while we had time, Costin, I'm curious if we ignored sidecars, ignored everything. It sounded like you didn't want users to specify on their waypoint which tag they wanted to use. I'm curious what the alternative is and/or why we don't want that. I guess we're totally out of time now, but maybe while we're trickling into the next meeting.
Yeah,
that sounds like a really good conversation for the ambient meeting, and I have this on the agenda in the ambient meeting as well. So can we?
Okay,
Oh yeah, okay, let's do that.
Let's move to the next meeting then.
All right, see you all.
See you in 10 seconds.